5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Puck short.
Hello everyone and welcome to a brand new episode of the One Puck Short podcast. It is Wednesday the 20th of January 2016. Craig Anderson of BritishIceHockey.co.uk blog and Braehead Clan's media manager. He will be joining me a little bit later on to talk about the EIHL action north of the border, and also a blog he wrote recently on the idea of the NHL returning to Britain. But first, a couple of NHL news and notes I just wanted to get to. Montreal fallen out of the playoffs places. They had a brilliant start, a franchise record opening to the season, but now they find themselves a point outside of the wildcard spots after last night's loss to the Bruins. Michel Therrien seems to be well and truly on the hot seat right now. Their offense has fallen off a cliff. Their power play isn't doing particularly well right now, and where they were generating a lot more shots than their opponents previously, that's not the case anymore by the looks of things. They are really struggling, and they didn't score a huge amount of goals last year, and maybe this is the saving grace of Michel Therrien, is that he's had to try and get by without Carey Price. They didn't score a lot of goals last year, but they had one of the best defensive records in the league. Price won the Hart Memorial Trophy for a very good reason. He's been absent since the end of November. He re-aggravated an injury sustained during October. A lot of people feel he was rushed back. That's not necessarily Terrien's fault, but he came back. He didn't finish the game against the Rangers on November 25th. And they've just created, really, since then. It's hard to watch at times. And also the case, as I said, against Michel Therrien is mounting right now. I mean, on November 26th, Montreal led the entire NHL 17-4-2. As I said, that was one of the best starts in club history. Since then, their record 6-15-2. And that changed last night. It's now 6-16-2. It's incredible to see the way they've dropped. Andrew Berkshire, who's my guest on the podcast a couple of episodes ago, posted a graph up on Twitter yesterday. Since December 2nd through to January 18th, they'd only gained 9 points. 9 points, that's the lowest total of anyone in the league by a decent chunk, by 3 or 4 wins. And this is a team who is supposed to be potentially a contender, or at least definitely a playoff team. Most people would have backed the Canadiens to be one of the top 3 in the Atlantic, but as they've fallen away, Florida had that great streak not that long ago. The Panthers are on a little bit of a skid now. They've lost their last 3, but that great winning streak put them to the top of the pile. The Red Wings are kind of doing what the Red Wings do. Tampa Bay have recovered from a poor start. They've won 6 straight. I said the Bruins are doing okay. New Jersey are the other wildcard spot right now. They keep hanging around there. Ottawa are currently ahead of Montreal on the tiebreak. So, they're getting caught up in this knife fight now that I talked about with Andrew Berkshire a couple of weeks ago. So, difficult times. Is the time to make that change now? Maybe, as I said, maybe the saving grace of Michel Therrien is that he's had to battle without his best player. But as Andrew mentioned on that episode we recorded, that Guy Boucher is out there. He's a guy who has managed to generate offense wherever he's gone. He's normally associated with that 1-3-1 forecheck that so famously Tampa Bay deployed against Philadelphia, where they just basically stood pat until the Flyers did something. But Boucher's managed to get the most out of his power play where he's gone. He's managed to get the most out of his offense wherever he's gone. So he's there in the wings. Again, as Andrew said, this is a francophone, and his shadow looms large right now. And the case for letting Michel Therrien go just keeps growing every time the Habs lose and the further they slip out of the playoffs. As I mentioned, Florida, top of the Atlantic. Washington, clear leaders in the Metropolitan right now, 73 points. They are a whopping 18 points ahead of the New York Rangers. The New York Islanders round off the Metropolitan. At the bottom end of things, Columbus, obviously, life without Ryan Johansson. I don't think they'll be too worried there, as with each passing loss, their chances of getting a shot at Austin Matthews seem to grow. Chicago on a 12-game winning streak right now. A lot of people asking whether Pat Kane can break the 100-point barrier, or more importantly, break Sidney Crosby's 119 points for a few years ago. 120 points. Kane is currently on pace for 119 points. Some people think he will break it. Others are not sure. It's either way. He's having a pretty amazing year on the ice. Obviously, there was those issues off the ice in the summer, which, leave a very bitter taste for a lot of people. I've touched on the show before. But on the ice, there's no argument he's been playing particularly well right now. In the Pacific, Los Angeles still the clear leaders, 12 points ahead of San Jose, who've now climbed to second in the Pacific. Arizona hanging on in there, they're third. Vancouver and Anaheim leading the chasing pack. Vancouver actually are only out of it on the tiebreak. They have the same number of points as the Sharks and Coyotes. Anaheim are 4 points back. But that Pacific division is so funky this year that they might jump back into it. Mention the Kings very quickly there as leaders of Pacific. Just to confirm, Anze Kopitar's 8-year extension is now confirmed. I said 10-year on the last show because I'm a silly goose. It's 8 years, $80 million. The bit that makes me wonder about this, again, as discussed on a couple of episodes recently, one with Travis Yost and on the most recent episode myself, what happens to the Kings cap? Because they are going to be hard against it, especially the way Vincent Lecavalier is playing. Very small sample size, but he's played pretty well. A lot of people didn't predict that he would do what he's done for the Kings in that short space of time. So if he changes his mind, that's going to hurt the Kings quite a lot, especially the way the Canadian economy is shaping up right now. The loonie, as they call it, keeps decreasing in value. That's going to hurt hockey-related revenues, and thus it's going to hurt the cap. It's not going to jump by very much. Los Angeles are going to really up against it next year, especially if Lecavalier sticks around. And the last bit of NHL news before we get to Craig. John Scott will go to the All-Star game. He will lead the Pacific, and he may wear the St. John's Ice Caps jersey. I keep tripping over words today. I apologise. So, yeah, John Scott goes. And interesting, the debate kind of still goes what happens with Arizona. I do that at least once per week. And whether they should have a representative there. A lot of people feel that Oliver Ekman-Larsson should have gone. He's certainly been their best player this year. But as it is, John Scott will go. He will lead the Pacific. And it hopefully draws a line through a particularly uncomfortable little episode for the NHL. Okay, have a quick advert, and then I'll be joined by Craig Anderson. One Puck Short is brought to you in association with Eastside Hockey Manager, an in-depth ice hockey management simulation brought to you by Sports Interactive and Sega, developers of the world-famous Football Manager series, available now for PC via Steam. Joining me now on the One Puck Short podcast, a writer, presenter, media manager for the Braehead Clan, many things to Scottish ice hockey. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Craig Anderson. Hi Craig, how are you?
Hi Rob, yeah, I'm good, thanks.
Good. Glad to have you on the show. Obviously, I hopped on your radio show a couple of times last season when you were still with Rock Sports. And most of your stuff these days with britishicehockey.co.uk, and we'll get to one of your blog posts on the NHL later on. But I thought we'd start, as I have you on the show, with a little bit of the Elite League action north of the border, especially with the situation in Edinburgh, which has created a lot of conversation and discussion this week. Top scorer Ryan Hayes left to join Sheffield. Then David Rutherford left for Belfast. They've signed Brandon Thompson today. But I created quite a lot of discussion around the league that they should lose two of their better players like that, and the circumstances and what it actually meant for the Capitals this season after such a promising start. What's your take on the situation at Murrayfield?
I think it's extremely unfair on both the fans and Riley Emerson. I mean, I remember speaking to Riley when he first got the job. And he was so excited about getting the job in the first place, and he had so many ideas and, to an extent, ambitions about what he wanted to do this year. Yeah. And of course, you can understand that. It's his first job as a coach, and he's really keen to begin and get his hands dirty. And I think what's happened this season has just been one thing after another. Players have left for personal reasons. We've seen the likes of Nate Fleming and Craig McCallum leave for those such reasons. Everett Sheen back at the start of the season, he was the captain at the time. And he left as well. But now we've got Ryan Hayes and David Rutherford that you alluded to there. Very different circumstances, it seems. Hayes has been unsettled for a while. Rutherford seems like a bit of a character, for want of a better expression. By all accounts, he wasn't very popular. Among his teammates. He had a very self-centred attitude. And I'm only going, I don't know Rutherford personally, I'm sure he's lovely. This is just what I'm hearing on the grapevine. Yeah. There was the interview with Ross Stewart, a colleague of mine. He works for the Edinburgh Evening News. He covers the beat over at Murrayfield. And he was actually on another podcast this week, and they asked him about the Hayes and Rutherford situation, and he was actually at Murrayfield when the news broke that Hayes had gone, and Rutherford seemingly was very unhappy. He was straight on the phone to his agent, and that kind of tells you all you need to know about the kind of character that Rutherford is. He got what he wanted. He got a big move to the Belfast Giants, and I'm sure he'll do a job. But it's got to be at the back of the Belfast fans' minds that they've signed a player here who's walked out in a club. Okay, Edinburgh maybe that little bit different to a lot of other teams in the Elite League and how they're run and how things are done there. And of course, we all know about the old rink and the old-fashioned kind of thing. But that's no reason to walk out in a club halfway through. It's not a very good precedent to set. It doesn't say a lot about your character as well. And I think the fans and Riley, as I said at the start, just deserve so much better from these two guys.
And it was disappointing for a lot of people because the Capitals have made a really strong start to the year. They've been on a bit of a cold streak lately, but it looked like they'd maybe turned a corner under Riley Emerson's leadership, and then that maybe if the future was a little bit brighter, they were still fighting, well, they still are, to be fair, they're still fighting for a playoff spot, but obviously the loss of Hayes and Rutherford, it doesn't help the situation. I mean, Brandon Thompson comes in, he played for Rochester Institute of Technology, tripping over my words there, in the NCAA last year, which is not a bad programme to come from, and so it's going to be interesting to see what he can do for the club. But as you say, it's quite a blow, and the circumstances were very odd, particularly Rutherford, and just the way it came about, because there's a lot of controversy over the fact that they joined rival Elite League clubs, and Scott Neal was quite open about, well, I think he was quite open about the situation that both wanted to leave, potentially to either Europe or North America, and Edinburgh wouldn't have recouped anything for the players had they done that. And I thought it was quite admirable of Scott Neal to be that honest about the situation and say, look, Sheffield and Belfast have agreed what was effectively a transfer fee, so we've signed off that they can go and move to these clubs. And I quite like that bit of honesty from Scott Neal in the situation, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely agree. And excuse me, Scott has this reputation of being quite stingy. He can be quite tight with his money. And when you consider that the club nearly went out of business 5-6 years ago, you can understand that to an extent. Riley Emerson has worked on him. I think it's fair to say he's managed to eke that little bit more money out of Scott this year. And you can see that in the quality of players that they brought in. And as you said, they had a great start to the season. I think they were up around 4th, 5th place at one point, but they were starting to look like a force. They were starting to look like something different that they couldn't quite achieve under Richard Hartman before, and that's no slight on Richard. We can understand his hands were tied. But Scott, I think Scott's done the right thing. Had they gone back to North America, they weren't so much they wouldn't have made any money, they would have lost money because they would have had to pay for these guys to return home. So in moving them on to Sheffield Steelers in Hayes' case and to Belfast and Rutherford, then that's where he's getting something back on them, something back on two players that have done well for them this year. When you look at the stats, they don't lie, they have done a job for them this year. So you have to admire the fact that Scott's open and honest about it. Yeah. And, at the end of the day, you've got two guys in your team that they clearly don't want to be there for whatever reason. So he's made the best of a bad situation.
Just in very general terms, we spoke a little bit about the Capitals there, their strong start to the year, and despite the cold streak lately, that things look a bit more promising at the Murrayfield rink. Just in general terms this year, it seems that the Scottish teams have improved yet again. Dundee have taken a big step forward under Mark Lefebvre. Fife and Braehead are both competing in the Challenge Cup tonight. Not going so well for Braehead Clan right now in Nottingham, but they're competing on all fronts. I think a lot of people might even favour Braehead to maybe challenge for the league title again. They're currently third, but they have games in hand on Sheffield and Cardiff, respectively. Has Scottish ice hockey taken a big step forward in the last sort of 12 to 24 months, do you feel?
Definitely. I mean, when you consider the conference system has made things that little bit more competitive, there is still that imbalance in terms of the fixtures, and I suppose that's a bug there for a few fans out there. But I think it's helped. We're not seeing as many heavy defeats on the Scottish teams because they don't have the resources that the likes of Nottingham and Belfast and certainly Sheffield enjoyed in the past. Braehead, certainly, you can argue, have those resources because Neil Black obviously owns Nottingham as well as Braehead, so they may be the exception to the rule. Dundee, Edinburgh and Fife have to live a more modest existence, and they've done well to get the best out of what they can. Matt Lefebvre, you mentioned Dundee there, he's really reinvigorated that team. I mean, they were shocking last year under Jeff Hutchins, and no matter what he tried to do, it just wasn't going right for him. Naturally, he reached the end of the road last year. He went and got a Chinese, and I believe he's still there. And I find Fife to be a very, I mean, you mentioned Fife are challenging, and they are. You know, they are, but they're a team that, even last year, they struggled for consistency, and that still continues to be the same thing. And I've said this on other shows, I've said this on social media, you know, the fans still clamour, you know, for a change. Yeah. You know, Todd Duty and Danny Stewart have been together, you know, a few years now, and they just feel we need something fresh to bring to the team. I mean, let's not understate Todd's contribution to Fife Flyers as a whole. I mean, it's a word bandied about all too often. The guy's a legend. You can't argue with that. That'll never, ever be taken away from him for everything he's done for the club. Yeah, I mean, Todd Duty is a club legend, and, you know, I think that the fans just feel now they're looking for that little bit extra now. You know, they've made themselves a very steady force in the Elite League. They're capable of taking some big results off some good teams, but they just can't make that next level. And whether that's down to the coaching, I suppose that's up for the club to decide. I thought this year it might have been a bit different. They changed the team around. A lot of it enforced, because a lot of the players that got into the playoff finals 2 years ago, for some reason it didn't work again last year. And there has been some good performers. TJ Craig, Ryan Dingle, Justin Fox are players whose names crop up quite a lot in terms of the points. So, I mean, Todd has certainly done something right. It's just getting to that next stage. I mean, you know, they're playing teams like Manchester and losing and things like that. That's the teams they need to be winning. They should be a firm mid-table team, and there's just something that keeps dragging them back into the sort of lower end of the top 8, and that's unfortunate for the fans. You know, and then you get Braehead, as I said, they're the exception to the rule. You know, they've got a coach in Ryan Finnerty who's been there and done that in this league. He's very experienced at this level. They can afford to bring in ex-NHL players like Mike Jackman, you know, ex-KHL goalies like Chris Holt. You know, it's a world of difference that the Braeheads are bringing in guys on bigger salaries when you compare them to the other teams that they're up against. So I don't think Scotland is a good place for the English teams in Cardiff and Belfast to come to. They certainly don't enjoy it as much as they used to, put it that way, because they know they're in for a tough time wherever they go in any of those 4 venues. And I think that's fantastic that Scottish hockey's got like that. As I said, mentioned the playoffs there. Fife got there 2 years ago, as did Braehead. The one and only time we've seen at least one Scottish team in the playoff finals. You know, it's going to happen again. It's going to happen a bit more regularly. Let's hope it's this season.
Yeah, and as you said, it'd be interesting to see what Fife do, I think, maybe at the end of this year, because, I mean, Todd Duchamp was a player for them when I started watching the British ice hockey in Peterborough, and that's, 18 years ago, so the 1999-2000 season, I started watching the then Peterborough Pirates regularly, and Dukes, as he's known, was a force then as a player, and obviously went on to become the coach. Even after what was the British National League folded, he stuck with the team, and he's still coached to this day. But whether they do look for that change, because they're a team, as you said, that are dangerous on their day, who could do something perhaps in the playoffs, or maybe if they can turn around the deficit against Sheffield tonight in the Cup, they could continue there and maybe, you know, still a dark horse, but maybe go on to win it. It's as I said, they're trailing on our group, but interesting times there, and as you said, Dundee have improved, and Braehead are always a competitor, it seems, these days. So interesting times, certainly north of the border. And it doesn't feel like it's going to be too long before we see some silverware go up there, I don't think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, it's coming. You know, the feeling is it's definitely coming. You know, the guys have worked so hard there to get the club to this kind of point. Well, you know, the things aren't looking too good at the moment in terms of Braehead down at Nottingham. So we can only hope that's just a blip. Certainly from my point of view, I've got something to write later on. I'd like to write something for Keely. But no, there is that feeling. I mean, things that are starting to click for Braehead. It's 7 wins and 8 going into tonight's game, you know, and it's really, really clicked, you know. And I don't know if anyone else has picked up on this. I've certainly noticed it, and again, I mean nothing against the individual I'm about to name here, but since Chris Holt got injured, Clan have actually, you know, won 7 of those 8 games. You know, they used Gary Russell for the first 3 of those games, and then Travis Phillips came in. And it's been a seamless transition. You know, you'd usually expect a goalie to need a game or two to get used to the level he's playing at, to adapt to the surroundings that he's going to be working in. But he's taken to it like a duck to water, you know, and he's enjoying it. You know, he's a pal of Thomas Nesbitt, who plays for Braehead Clan. The two of them played together at Armada Jackals last season, and they were at college, at university together as well. So, you know, Thomas was heavily involved in bringing Travis over. And, you know, it's as though Holtzy has never been there. You know, I don't mean that to sound as bad as it does, but Travis has just performed that well, and he got his shutout on Saturday against Coventry. he was absolutely superb, and he's really been impressive. And Ryan Finnerty, I think he knows he's going to have to make a decision at some point, whether he decides to stick with Travis. I think in terms of playing, he's going to keep Travis on just now, but there's going to come a point where the question's going to be asked, who are you going to keep? Are you going to keep the new guy? Are you going to lose Holtzy, who, came here with a big reputation? He's got great stats, but there are times he's let some really silly goals in, and that's frustrating to watch for the fans as well, because he can make some great saves, and he has done. But for some reason, those silly ones just seem to sneak away from him and things like that. Whereas Travis Fullerton, on the other hand, has been very steady, very solid in there. Gets across his crease quickly, can shut the space down. And he talks to his D-men as well, from what I'm told as well. So the guy seems to be, very much part of the team already. We just need to see how things are going to pan out for Chris Holt once he returns from injury.
Yeah, it's certainly been on a good streak, a bit of a hot streak lately, the Clan. And interesting, as I said, they've got games in hand on Sheffield, who are currently a point ahead of them. They've got 2 games in hand on the Steelers there. They've got a whopping 4 games in hand on the current league leaders, Cardiff, so they could really close some ground and even overtake Cardiff, I think, if results go their way over the next couple of weeks and they make the most of those games in hand. So it has been interesting to see how well they've done with Fullerton in there since Chris Holt was injured. Maybe it was the kind of kick up the backside they needed. They lent on Holt a little bit too much. It's hard to say. You don't know sort of what the mentality is. Sometimes guys just kind of find a different gear when somebody else is put in there, and it sort of forces them to put their own ideas up. So, but interesting times at the Braehead Arena, no doubt. Moving on, Craig, to the main crux of kind of today's show. You wrote a blog for BritishIceHockey.co.uk. Entitled "When is the NHL coming back to Britain?" And I think the title pretty much summarises exactly what the article was about. But it was one that created a lot of discussion among fans, both here and even abroad as well, who came to the NHL Premier Games in London in 2007. I know even Patrick O'Sullivan mentioned it this week on Twitter. He was a member of the LA Kings at the time. And as I said, it created a lot of discussion. A lot of people would love to see it come back to Britain again, to have that opportunity to see some of the best players in the world battle it out on British ice. But there are, I think it's fair to say, some barriers to the the return of the NHL Premier Games, shall we call it, in general, because of course they stopped going to Europe as well. So I just wanted to let you sort of summarise your feelings on the subject, and before we kind of leap into a bit of a back and forth on it.
Well, I mean, my idea initially for the blog was the fact that last week we saw NBA basketball being played at the O2 Arena in London, and of course we've seen in recent years the NFL, the American football, played at Wembley Stadium, and I think they've signed a big money deal to continue to do that, and I believe they're actually using Twickenham next year as well, where they play rugby. And we see, even in this country, as I mentioned in the blog, we're seeing English Premier League football try and, expand the borders a wee bit, try and export games out to foreign countries. Anybody who follows football knows all about the 39 game idea, which I quite frankly find preposterous. Even here in Scotland, they were talking about a Premier League game between Dundee and Celtic in Philadelphia for some reason. And it's, they're looking at something different. Well, we don't necessarily agree, with what they're trying to do. When you've got the American sports coming here and attracting big crowds, I don't see why the NHL can't at least look into the idea. I know weather's different, climate's different, conditions are different, and I think it's something it's worth looking at, because there is a big ice hockey base in this country. Maybe not everybody supports the league teams for whatever reason, but I just think if you were to put 2 NHL teams somewhere here in the UK, whether it's an indoor or outdoor arena, I think you would get a crowd for it. Because you've not got the thing, it's much different if you were to play Nottingham Panthers and Cardiff Devils somewhere, outdoors, in a big, in a Winter Classic style game or a Stadium Series kind of game. It wouldn't attract that same thing, because it would primarily Panthers and Devils fans that would go to it. I think as an interested neutral, I'd quite like to go. But you know what I'm saying? If people want to see NHL, savour the atmosphere of the NHL, and it might not be exactly the same in this country to replicate it, but it would certainly give them an idea of how they do it, over there, albeit they brought it over here. If you know what I'm saying? I'm not waffling too much.
No, I mean I know exactly where you're coming from. I went in 2007 and they sold out both nights, if I remember rightly. So on that basis, you'd say there's a market for it. and I'm not sure the weather conditions are particularly a barrier because obviously they had the Stadium Series game in Los Angeles. So I think if you can have a game of hockey in LA, even in winter, where it's still reasonably warm in California, then you could probably manage to set something up pretty much anywhere. I think the thing that
yeah, I mean, in terms of having an indoor venue, I think the only one that really sticks out is the O2 Arena in London, because it holds something like 20,000. You could have it in Nottingham, and you would sell out, but there's a potential for more. If you want to try it, that's maybe the place to do it. But I think the O2 Arena, would attract a bigger crowd. I think it's certainly more workable. And I listed a few potential venues for outdoors as well. The football stadiums mainly, because they tend to be they're the venues that could probably hold something like that. And again, for trying it out, you want to look at somewhere that's, like I mentioned, the White Hart Lane, where Tottenham Hotspur play. They're 40,000. Well, let's try it in 40,000. But then if it's a success, gradually build it up. And I mentioned the likes of Hampden Park up here in Glasgow. There's 50,000. And you build it up. I can't see it filling Wembley. I think it's too big an ask to have it fill Wembley. You consider how huge Wembley is for a start. And seeing an ice hockey game with the dimensions of the rink are much smaller than a football pitch or a rugby pitch and that. So I think Wembley would be a bit of a push. But it's certainly worth looking into. I think there's potential for it, and the NHL as an organisation, surely they've got to. They look at ideas, of how to expand their brand. I think that's a good way of doing it. Somebody tweeted, I think, in response to the article, whether it was to me or to British Ice Hockey, about the fact that, it's not the NHL's job to promote ice hockey in this country. No, maybe not to an extent that they're looking at in terms of, the elite league hockey, but certainly expose the sport to a wider audience, and then people, if they like it, will go, ice hockey, I wonder if we've got that here in the UK. Oh, there is. There's an elite league, there's an English Premier League, there's an SNL, etc. And just to let people know that it is out there, and I think it can be done. I think if it's marketed the right way, I think it's sold the right way, I think there's definitely a potential there.
Yeah, a couple of people kind of tagged onto that. Graham from the Purple Army podcast, @Clantastic on Twitter, he said he'd be interested, but only if the Elite League are able to use it to properly further interest in the sport here, rather than just get good seats for friends, which made me chuckle. Paul Wheeler, fourth line wing, basically the same comment, that the domestic system wouldn't take advantage. It's an issue that I think you and I have both had before, that they haven't capitalised on certain opportunities. Again, the last NHL Premier Games in 2007, the Winter Olympics from Vancouver in 2010, when the final was on BBC Two at about 8 p.m. It was basically a prime slot, and I think a lot of people kind of sadly feel that way, that the British game might not capitalise. And I agree with what the person who sent you that reply sort of said. It's not necessarily the NHL's job to promote hockey in other lands, Great Britain in this case, but it is their job to kind of promote themselves. And this is where things start to maybe get a little bit into a grey area, so to speak, because I think the NBA and the NFL have done a lot of groundwork in Britain and Europe, especially Britain, to build their brand here. There's obviously NFL UK offices and all sorts. And so putting games on at Wembley, and as you said, Twickenham, they've had NBA games at the O2. That's part of building that brand. It's part of a mission that's been going on for years and years and years. Whereas the NHL is still, I think it's still going for lower hanging fruit in its own backyard. There's parts of North America where hockey isn't particularly big, and they're talking about expansion to places like Seattle and Las Vegas, and that's kind of their low hanging fruit, I think. And that's their focus right now, because the Winter Classic rakes in huge amounts of money and it moves the needle on television. And then you've got the Stadium Series games, which are slightly lower key, but again they're kind of part of that strategy to make hockey, I don't know, say more interesting, that's probably the wrong term, but just do something unique to create interest, and it feels like that's the low-hanging fruit for them. And a lot of people, as I said, are in favour of seeing the NHL in Britain for all the reasons you said, because for fans in Great Britain and, the idea of it for the NHL to follow the footsteps the NFL and the NBA have already trodden. The British economy is pretty strong in those terms, so it's not like there's not potential to make money out of this market. It just seems to me that the NHL has got lower hanging fruit right now, and would they want to go through that again? Especially, I think part of the problem at this point is that the games in Europe didn't sell particularly well, or not as, in London they sold out. People flew in from, because they were the first ones. So people flew in from Europe to watch. Obviously, British fans headed south or north if they're from the south coast to watch and filled the rink on both nights. And everybody loved it. But when they took them to sort of Sweden, there was gaps. And if you're going to do a big event like that, you don't want gaps appearing on the TV channels. And I wonder if that put them off a little bit. And again, that's not British fans' fault because, the O2 was full. But the optics are there that the NHL Premier Games failed, inverted quotes. So I wonder if that puts them off slightly as well.
Puts them off, but again, when you look at how well the NFL and the NBA have done it in recent years, and you go back to 2007 when the NHL were here, things have moved on. People are looking for something different.
Yeah.
I don't know how many subscribers Premier Sports have, but there is a market for it. And Premier Sports have focused on getting as much ice hockey on their channel as they can between, NHL, between the Elite League, Champions Hockey League, the Swedish League's been on there as well, not to mention the internationals. So there's obviously a market for it, and they're marketing that really, really well. The NHL just needs to tap into that a wee bit, I think, and at least, give it a go. I think it's a different world now. I think, 2007, I don't know if we had Twitter or that back then, it certainly wasn't too far off if we didn't. Viral marketing campaigns and things that are, I think there's so much they can do with it. And as I said, this blog was born out of the fact that the NBA were in London and being mindful of the NFL, and it was just something I wanted to get out there, just to get encourage a bit of debate, and it's certainly done that, and I'm glad it has, and that's why you were kind enough to invite me on. And I think there's so much potential with this sport, and I feel we do undersell it. We really do. I mean, I can only do what I can do. I can only do what I can do from a press perspective here in Scotland, not to mention, you mentioned that I work with Braehead Clan, I do all that, and I do some other things as well. And we're all fairly limited. We're all pigeonholed into what we can do because of the coverage of other sports and the fact that people would much rather watch football. And you'll never get football off the back pages. The big, sporting events like the Open and Wimbledon always garner big headlines as well. I just think we should take a chance on it, and that's not just the NHL, that's everybody in general, but I could rant for ages about that.
Yeah, I mean, as we've said, we've sort of mentioned the NBA and the NFL a couple of times, and I think the one thing that maybe disappoints me out of it all is that obviously the NHL was here in 2007, and where, again, as I alluded to, the NFL have done a lot of groundwork to build interest, and they've obviously got deals with like Sky Sports. I think NBA is on, I want to say BT Sport, they might have moved to Sky Sports now. But they've basically grown the interest in the game, both in a fan sense but also a media sense. So they're striking up these substantial, really, television deals with some of the big providers here. And I'm never going to knock what Premier are doing because they're working hard for hockey, really, to get the Elite League and the NHL and the Swedish League. Having the HD channel is a big step forward. So they're working hard, but they're not quite in the BT Sky Sports arena yet. And I've kind of got a sort of tangent here, but what I'm driving towards is I'm disappointed the NHL didn't do more, perhaps, to try and grow something from the seeds they planted in 2007. That they kind of put something in place there where they'd been. I mean, Anaheim were the Stanley Cup champions. So they brought the cup over and all this kind of stuff. They had really a good opportunity there to not necessarily springboard, but at least grow something that now, 8, nearly 9 years down the road, could have flourished into something much bigger for them and a much more vibrant hockey market for the NHL. And hopefully by extension, the British game could have done its little bit, as you said, to use that to help it promote itself. Because people go, NHL, great. Is there a British team near me? And that's where they kind of, by osmosis, almost start to build their own crowds.
Well, not only that, I mean, back in 2007, 2008, when you mentioned the previous games, I think when you look at, the Elite League was in, not in a bad way, but it wasn't exactly healthy. There was teams dropping out for financial reasons. So if people did think to follow up and look at it and saw the league was in a bad way and the teams were folding because of it, then that might have put them off and you maybe lost those fans. Whereas now it's in a much healthier state. Up here, again, from a Scottish context, you get 3,000 average going to Braehead every week, Fife bringing in average 2,000, Edinburgh and Dundee are averaging about 900 to 1,000 as well. So there's a much healthier fan base for ice hockey in this country, I think, than there was 7-8 years ago. And again, that's another reason why it's something to maybe revisit. The league's a lot stronger. It's, they're talking about expanding. I think the London team will help that if and when that ever comes. Because let's face it, London's the epicenter of everything in this country, it seems. And if you get a team in there playing at a big venue, then the opportunities are endless, and we'll just need to wait and see.
Yeah, it's, as you said, it's certainly created a lot of debate, and most people, as I said, seem to be in favour of it. I sort of threw it out on Twitter earlier on, and most people are for it. And we've had one chap from over in Rochester over the pond, and he said, I'd love to see a Stadium Series game across the pond. Let's help grow the game, which, as you see, it comes back to your point about trying to help use it as a springboard, not just for NHL, but for the game as a whole in Great Britain. Stephen Packer could work as part of a European Stadium Series. Again, there's a Stadium Series idea. Game in the UK, game in Germany, Sweden, and maybe have something like Florida, Carolina as a home and home. The Rangers maybe, something like that. So, yeah, a lot of people were really positive about the idea. It seems like it's a logistical argument from the NHL's point of view rather than a lack of potential interest here, because I think people would come. And, as I said, because London...
Yeah, let's go on social media and bother them.
Well, the thing was with London...
Let's go on social media and start bothering the NHL. Come on, let's do it.
But, and the thing with, as you said, the only really viable indoor arena is probably the O2, but again, as I mentioned before, because it's London, it can bring people in from the continent quite easily to Heathrow, Stansted, Gatwick and things. So, there's potential there. And
not only that, it can actually bring... Sorry, Robert, it can also bring people in from London who don't have an ice hockey team as well. I'm sure there's a raft of ice hockey fans in London who, where's the nearest team? What, Nottingham? The geography isn't very good here. Coventry, Nottingham, I mean, too far away,
Nearest Elite League, yeah.
It's, if a team get an ice hockey game on their doorstep, then they'll go to it. They won't have to travel as far north as Nottingham to Wales, to Cardiff, whatever. If the game's on the doorstep, they'll go to it. And I think, again, I've said it quite often, I think it's something worth looking into, especially when you get basketball and American football attracting the crowds that they are. And I think the fans here would absolutely lap it up. I know I would, and I'm all the way up in Scotland, so it's, it'd be absolutely great.
As I say, I mean, I don't think it too much of an objection from our side of the Atlantic, as it were. It seems to be that it's getting over the other hurdles in North America. As I said, at the moment, the outdoor games are the big thing for the NHL runner. They're the big marquee event, and then you've still got the All-Star game. So it's trying to, I don't know, maybe it's when people tire of the outdoor games that this will come around again, and they'll reconsider looking at Europe, especially if they've already gone through an expansion process, which looks slightly less likely today than it did maybe 6 months ago, but hasn't gone away as such. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do and how they grow the league and the sport, because, as you said, there is an appetite for it here, it seems. Not necessarily every year, so to speak, because it maybe takes the shine off, but there is an appetite to see something similar to what we saw in 2007 coming back to the UK. But Craig, thank you very much for joining me today. Where can people find you online and so forth?
On Twitter, at Craigie Anderson is the best place to get me. I'm also under at Slapshot Scott as well. I don't do so much Slapshot Scotland stuff anymore. I'm more a general kind of ice hockey writer. But no, I'm always out there.
Well, thanks again for joining me today, Craig. I'll let you get back to your day.
Thanks very much.
One puck short.
And that about wraps things up for this week's show. Thanks again to Craig for joining me. Great to have a little chat there about the idea of the NHL coming back to Great Britain. Interesting to see how that pans out over the coming years, because there's a great possibility that it may happen again in the future. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we go. You can follow me on Twitter at RobMcGregor35. You can email onepuckshort @gmail.com. So if you want to get in touch, tweet or email, whatever, just questions, thoughts, something you want to get off your chest, get in touch. Feedback, love the show, hate the show, tell us what you think. Feedback's important. And in that vein, if you're an iTunes subscriber, please consider leaving a review. You can also find us on Facebook, facebook.com/onepuckshort. So head there to like us. The podcast is also available on YouTube, so you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's a link on the blog, which is onepuckshort.wordpress.com, where you'll also find a couple of buttons you can support the show. There's a PayPal donation button. There's also an Amazon affiliate link. It takes you to Amazon. You shop normally. It doesn't cost you a penny extra. When you hit pay at the checkout, we get a little kickback from the lovely folks at Amazon. That about wraps it up for this show. Thanks again to Craig for joining me. Thanks to everybody at home for listening. I'll speak to you all again very soon.